Let me read to you a passage from the 3rd chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 13 to 17. It's the Gospel for the Feast of the Triumph of the Cross on September the 14th. St. John writes, Jesus said to Nicodemus, "No one has ever gone into heaven except the one who came from heaven, the Son of Man. Just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the desert, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him." That's from John chapter 3 verses 13 to 17 for the Feast of the Triumph of the Cross on September the 14th. What does it suggest to us? Well, of course, it refers to the cross and its triumph. What do I mean? Well, one of the most striking features of the world is its activity. As we look out on, well, a tranquil scene, and as we look on pictures of the world at large, we might initially be tempted to think of the world as in repose, even static. But of course, the world is a huge, throbbing, churning factory. It never stops its work of causation and production. Every part of it is acting upon other things and being acted upon by still other things. Just as by analogy with human beings we might say that a machine is at work, so the world is ever at work. Everywhere things are in formation, being caused to appear and function, or being replaced. Mountains gradually rise, valleys form, the animals build their abodes, and hunt for food while being hunted themselves. Man, the pinnacle of this sea of activity, himself leads the way in his work. He is the one par excellence who works. He is born and he soon begins to work. In the book of Genesis, we read that God blessed the man and the woman he had created, saying to them, "Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that move on the earth." Chapter 1 verse 28. His was the prerogative of giving to all things their names. Chapter 2 verse 19 to 20. It is by his work that he gains this dominion. But it is a dominion that must be exercised as one subject to the moral law of his Creator. He may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but he must not eat or even touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Chapter 2, Genesis. All this is to say that man, constituted Lord of the world, is meant by the Creator to strive for dominion. He is intended to achieve. He is meant for victory. But what has happened? He fell in defeat, and it was his own undoing. He fell because he sought a dominion according to his own law and not according to God's. He touched and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Genesis 3 verse 6. And so, intended for dominion, he became enslaved, and the victor was sin and death. Man was crushed in defeat and cast out of the garden. Having taken from the forbidden tree, gone was his power to take from the tree of life and thus live forever. Genesis 3 verse 22. And so there entered upon the world a figure never intended by the Creator. That figure was a dark, blood-stained, grinning ogre. It was unconquerable, and it would smash every human being. No matter how common the victories of man in his work, he was bound for defeat because his meeting with this dark figure was inevitable. It was the one enemy he could not outdo, no matter how much he struggled and fought it off. It sought him out, whoever he may be, and he would overcome. That figure was death. I remember watching a movie in which, to save his family, a good man courageously stepped forward to fight a hard and evil champion. He began very well, striking many telling blows and matching force with force, but from the outset it appeared that his defeat was inevitable, and so it was. He was overcome and destroyed. Man cannot now win. He is subject to death because of the original sin that separated him from God and rendered him prone to personal sin. What then is the answer, if there is one? The answer is death. At the beginning, God promised a grand reversal. The heel of the woman's offspring would strike the serpent's head. Surprise of God. When an enemy advances, one looks about for weapons with which to resist and overcome. But death would be the weapon. God sent his own divine Son to turn the inexorable tide from death to life eternal. And his great tool, his weapon of war, would be death itself. He freely and obediently submitted to death, which, like a terrible engine of war, came towards him, intending to destroy. The engine was fueled by Satan and his minions. The prince of this world was on his way, and his host was death. In the plan of God, it was by submitting to death in bearing witness to his truth that death would be overcome. This must never happen to you, Peter said to Christ. And Christ rebuked him as Satan, for he was not thinking as God thinks, but as man. And so Jesus Christ went to his death in fulfillment of the plan of God. He died a terrible death outside the city, a seeming defeat, the defeat that is universal for man. And in that defeat, he gained the victory. It was the triumph of the cross. In Jesus Christ, the defeat that is the cross is the triumph of the cross. Man now knows how to defeat the grand enemy of every man, which is death. The weapon of victory is obedient submission. Obedient submission to the will of God in suffering and death. When suffering and death come, they become our friends instead of our enemies, if we but submit to the will of God in union with the suffering and crucified Christ. Suffering and death, accepted in this way, become the path to glory forever. It is the distinctive teaching of Christ and Christianity that the cross is man's means of happiness and life. Let us look to Christ and to union with him then.